Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome to EllieMD's live educational series. We are so glad you're here as we continue our mission to educate, inspire, and empower you on your health journey. This episode is part of our men's health series designed to take a deeper look at men's health related issues covering hormones, energy, performance, stress, and longevity. At LEMD, we go beyond telehealth. We're building a community grounded in education, innovation, and personalized support. This series is one more way we're equipping you with the tools, strategies, and knowledge to thrive at every stage of life. Today, we're excited to welcome Tom Nicola, a veteran in the health and fitness industry with over 23 years of experience. Tom spent more than a decade at Lifetime leading their nutrition, lab testing, and supplement businesses, where he helped educate thousands of personal trainers. Since then, he's built a thriving online business through vigor training, science-based health education and guidance, and one-on-one consulting. Tom is known for simplifying complex health topics and helping people get stronger, leaner, and healthier, especially those navigating stress, hormones, imbalances, or genetic challenges. Beyond his work with individuals, Tom also mentors other fitness professionals to grow smarter, more successful business rooted in integrity and results. Tom, we're so thrilled to have you. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our
Thank
educational.
you, honey.
Thank you for being here. So I know you've had your own journey of health and recovery, and I'd love for you to share some of that with us and start with from the beginning. How did you get here? Where did it all start? Where's the passion coming from?
Well, I guess the very beginning was probably at 4 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And so as a child, I spent a lot of time at the Mayo Clinic, met with, numerous doctors. I got poked and prodded and as a little kid, my experience was like all happy memories, even though I was in the hospital for a period of time and getting spinal taps and bone marrows and that kind of thing. But my my overall experience, even though it was probably a traumatic thing with my parents, I just thought medicine was really cool. Doctors were cool, and that kind of led me into health as I got older. I went to college planning to go on to medical school, so my degree is pre-med biology. But my senior year of college, I met like six or seven different doctors and they all dissuaded me from going on to medical school and said, you should really be doing something where you're helping people stay healthy instead of treating them after they get sick. And so, with my degree, which was, like I said, it was pre-med, but a lot of exercise physiology, I ended up getting into personal training back in 2001. And then, as you said, a lot of my career, early part of it was at Lifetime. And so I was a personal trainer, department head, regional manager. And then eventually I ran lab testing, metabolic testing, fitness devices, nutritional products. So I got to help people get healthy and help trainers help people get healthier, looking at a lot of other things beyond exercise and even beyond nutrition because of the testing and the supplements and everything that I was involved in. And so after a while, my wife, who was also a personal trainer and very had a very successful health and wellness business of her own outside of Lifetime, that allowed me to leave the corporate world and then start my own business. And so today, we both have our own individual and then collaborative businesses in health and wellness. But I think a big part of my path has not only been the understanding of general principles like hormones and peptides and nutrition and exercise, but also the importance of being able to bounce back from short or long-term stressors. And I know we're going to be talking about cortisol, which is really our stress hormone, but at some of the extremes of when our bodies break, such as my Achilles tendon rupture that I had about 16 years ago, a torn bicep tendon that I had 12 years ago, and then I broke my neck 3 years ago. Each of those have taught me new lessons in what we can do to help our bodies rebound when they get broken, and also to just get stronger and more resilient, which at its core, I think we'll end up getting into a lot of what resilience is all about and being able to bounce back from traumas to just inconveniences to everyday stressors and that kind of thing. So 3 years ago, that was actually my introduction to peptides. I'll just briefly talk about that since we will eventually, I'm sure at some point, get into talking about specific peptides. But we were out mountain biking, my wife, our grandson, and I was up on a skinny bridge, and my front tire just went off the edge. It was just tall enough that my bike went completely vertical, and then I went headfirst into the ground and broke my C5 and C6, and then had major spinal compression as well. So it was a pretty traumatic event. Had to get carried out of the woods and had emergency surgery that day. So I do have C5, 6, and 7 are fused, but that experience was actually my first experience with peptides because that next week we happened to be friends with the one of the smartest guys in the world in natural medicine, but also who's the chair of the International Peptide Society, who you know, honey, as Jim Laval. And Vanessa reached out to him. He sent a care package of peptides that arrived shortly after we got back from the hospital after surgery, and that BPC 157, TB 500, ipamorelin. Those were all introductory peptides for me a few years ago when we didn't have access to them the way that we do today through EllieMD. So I'm excited to be partnered with Ellie, and Vanessa is as well because we have been big fans of what peptides can do for years now, and love the idea that now as long as you're in the United States, you can pretty easily get access to the quality of peptides that we have. So anyway, that's the quick summary.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And what a journey you've had of recovery. And well, I mean, you look incredible now. I can't believe that was just a few years ago. And yes, we have to talk about the peptides and what they've done, and we'll go into details. Um, but let's start with stress. This is a topic that a lot of people often overlook, especially men. Stress and how it relates to cortisol. So cortisol is at the center of the conversation nowadays. I hear a lot of people talking about it. Can you explain what cortisol is and what role it plays in our overall health?
Yeah. So most people understand cortisol is our stress hormone, and because of that, so many of us think that it's a bad thing, but if we didn't have cortisol, we would die. So it's not that we don't want cortisol, we just don't want it to be overactive at the wrong times or have it be too high for too long. So cortisol does things like it helps release uh, glucose into our bloodstream to provide quick energy, which in a fight or flight state, if a bear is chasing you or there's some kind of an emergency and you need to move quickly to defend yourself, it helps to do that. It increases inflammation. Of course, if there's a chance that we're going to be attacked or hurt, it primes our body to be able to heal itself. And so inflammation levels can go up. Heart rate increases. Um, we see an increase in blood pressure. And part of the reason for that, again, is that if 1,000 years ago we would have gotten injured, we need blood pressure to increase in order to just stabilize the flow of blood throughout our body. So that's one of the effects of it. But it does have negative effects as well, especially when uh, cortisol levels are too high for too long. So something like being able to provide quick energy, the ability for cortisol to stimulate the release of glucose and also the production of glucose means that we actually end up breaking down muscle tissue in order to raise glucose in order to provide quick energy. And so it's sort of like a double-edged sword in the fact that in short chunks, it's really important. It's valuable. It gets us out of bed in the morning. It gives us energy to get started with our day. When it's not being secreted appropriately or at the right times, it can cause us to lie awake in bed at night. It can cause massive muscle loss and visceral fat gain. It can shrink our brains and a whole bunch of negative things as well. So in short bursts, it's great. Long term, it can be pretty bad.
All right. Well, when cortisol stays elevated for too long, you touched on this briefly, but what are some subtle flags that men might miss before it becomes a bigger health problem and issue?
Sure. So when it, I guess to just take it one step back, as far as cortisol goes, we want it to be secreted the most in the morning. So it should reach a peak first thing in the morning that gets us up out of bed. And what you see is this consistent rhythm when somebody's healthy and that their cortisol levels are high, and then they gradually decrease throughout the morning, and then they take a big drop in the afternoon and then reach their low point in the evening. So as long as cortisol levels are low, that should set us up to be able to fall asleep easily. So when we're under chronic stress or cortisol levels get out of balance, usually what happens is cortisol levels can stay high for too much of the day. That can cause men and women to lie awake at night, wide awake. They can't fall asleep, and then they wake up in the morning feeling completely tanked because they didn't get any good sleep. Sometimes if cortisol levels are high, and this is more common in men than in women, they'll reach for alcohol as a way to kind of calm their nerves in order to relax, in order to fall asleep. Of course, that then can long term cause all sorts of problems with testosterone and other hormones. But they may find that they're looking for a drink or something to cause them to relax at night because cortisol levels aren't dropping like they should. They'll start seeing an increase in belly fat, and that's they can it can cause increases in fat all around and loss of muscle, but usually the first place that it'll show up in a guy who is like at a normal weight is going to be around the belly, and they'll start gaining some visceral fat or belly fat, and stomach starts to look like it's got a bowling ball sitting inside it. So those are some of the probably more common ones. Some of the others is I, I know there was a recent webinar more talking more about other aspects of men's health and erectile dysfunction. So if cortisol levels are chronically elevated, that can lead to signs of erectile dysfunction, loss of libido, no more morning erections, those kinds of things. So, there are the common ones, and then there's the subtle things. And sometimes guys will just shrug it off, like, I'm just too busy with work, or, I will eventually I'm going to get over this little lack of sleep. And the longer they delay that, the worse their cortisol balance becomes, and the worse the symptoms become, and the harder it becomes to reverse things. So the last thing, though, is I kind of touched on some physical symptoms, but the more mental ones are some guys, they're going to get short-tempered and angry and short-fused. That they make stupid decisions because as cortisol levels as cortisol levels are increased, it robs blood flow from the prefrontal cortex, which is where we make our logical decisions, and sends the blood to more of the primal center of our brain. And so we'll react poorly, we'll make bad decisions, rash decisions, or at the other end of the spectrum, guys will just have this general malaise and disinterest in anything. And if they go to a doctor, the doctor will probably say they're depressed, when in reality, they're overstressed, under recovered, and they've got a cortisol problem.
It's really interesting that you brought up alcohol earlier, that a lot of people reach for a glass of wine to calm their
Hmm.
nerves in order to sleep. That just sounds so counterintuitive because alcohol actually stresses the body even more,
Right.
which I would
Right.
imagine increases the cortisol, and it's this perpetual cycle,
Yep.
right? You wake up.
Yep.
So let's talk about fixes. What do we do about cortisol? Are there any quick fixes that we could tap into? And then what are some long-term fixes?
Yeah. So the first is to understand what's the cause of the cortisol issue. So is it because of your lifestyle, you have a reduced resilience to the stress that's in your life, or is it just the fact that there's an excessive, almost too much stress for anybody to handle kind of situation? And that the reason that's important is we don't necessarily, for our health, need to remove ourselves from stress that's causing cortisol imbalance. Ideally, what we need to be able to do is withstand higher and higher levels of stress over time, and then to be able to recover from them. So sometimes it isn't necessarily the environment, it's not the uh, the situation. It's just that we're doing things that compromise our resilience to stress. And so because of that, what would otherwise be a non-issue becomes one. So as an example, sleep would be like the most important thing that somebody could do to not only help recover from stress, but to build stress resilience. And this is applicable for, I know there's a lot of women on here as well. So, like when you're talking about things like adrenal fatigue, the importance of sleep is, I mean, that is the most important thing. And so when I have clients that are dealing with adrenal fatigue, I mean, that's what we address long before diet and exercise and that kind of thing, just so you can recover better. It's not only the hours that are spent in sleep, but it's the quality of sleep. So, honey, as you brought up, like drinking, sometimes people who drink alcohol actually do fall asleep faster and they may even stay asleep through the night. But that doesn't mean they're getting deep and REM sleep. They're just sleeping in more of a light sleep state. And because they had the alcohol, it keeps them somewhat comatose through the night. But if you improve deep and REM sleep, you prep your brain and your body to be able to handle stress better day after day as well. So sleep would be, the most important thing when it comes to handling stress properly. The other thing to go along with that, though, is that I have so many clients where they understand the importance of sleep, and they'll even say, well, I usually get at least 7 hours, which that's kind of the minimum is 7 hours of sleep. But they'll be going to bed at 11 o'clock one night and then 9 o'clock the next, and then they might stay up until 1 on a weekend. And when you do that, you completely sabotage your body's circadian rhythm, which is the 24-hour cycle of how it produces hormones. Going back to cortisol, cortisol needs to be secreted in sort of a circadian fashion where every day, if you're waking up around 6 o'clock and you're getting good sleep, your cortisol is probably going to be peaking right about 6 o'clock. But if you're going to bed at various times and then sleeping in at various times, it screws up your melatonin production, your testosterone production, your thyroid, your cortisol as well. And so you ruin the ability to create that circadian rhythm. So that's one thing, sleep. I mean, we could talk for another hour just on that. Resistance training is a great tool for helping not only well, not only help with other hormones like testosterone, but to improve your body's response to stress. This is something that I would imagine like 3 out of 4 clients I talk to about. When you do strength training and you do a set of an exercise and then you rest for 60 to 90 seconds, do another set, rest for 60 to 90 seconds, what you're doing is putting yourself in a parasympathetic state, which is your fight or flight. That's the same nervous system response you have that triggers cortisol production. So you do that for 30, 40, 50 seconds as you're doing a set, and that weight's getting heavier and you're trying to get to that last rep. And then you set it down and you have to recover between sets. That shifts you right over to a parasympathetic state, which is your rest and recover state, body state, until you do another set a minute and a half later. It's the only form of exercise really where you are consistently going back and forth between a parasympathetic and a sympathetic state. And so you train your body to get out of that fight or flight state better. So that's if you can emotionally and with your nervous system calm down after a stressful event easier, then the chance of that continuing to cause an increased cortisol state goes away. So I use like I emphasize resistance training all the time. Weight training and walking, like those are the two most important things when it comes to physical activity. And then the third would be the importance of eating regular meals on a regular schedule and getting enough protein in your diet. So I know over the last probably 10 years, intermittent fasting has become super popular. And there are some documented health benefits to it. But for someone who's under a lot of stress, skipping breakfast can be one of the worst things that they can do because their body's already pumping out a ton of cortisol as it is. And so going until noon or 1 o'clock before someone eats, or I've even had female clients who told me, yeah, I don't eat until like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Absolutely terrible for trying to rebalance your cortisol levels. So eating a breakfast, lunch, dinner, skipping snacks, and then making sure that it's high in protein, like those seem too simple. And a lot of times people are looking for other like easier, faster, sexier tips, like what supplements should I use and that kind of thing. But strength training, sleep, and a high protein diet where you're eating three regular meals, that is the foundation for building a resilient state where you can, get your cortisol levels back in balance.
That's fantastic advice because I forget to eat a lot of times until 1, 2 in the afternoon. And just my day gets started and I'm going and going, and you're absolutely right. And we could talk about the what happens long term if you
Yep.
continue that sort of lifestyle. So thank
Yep.
you for the reminder. I should know better, but even I'm guilty of this. You touched on hormones. It's interesting. When I started HRTs and hormone replacement therapy, my doctor was like, if we don't take control of your cortisol levels, the progesterone and none of the hormones will work because
Right.
cortisol plays such a crucial, important role in hormones. So, can we touch on that when it comes to men's testosterone levels, and how cortisol, balancing cortisol, how important it is when it comes to testosterone and other hormones in men?
Yeah, I mean, you can almost think of cortisol and testosterone as being on the opposite end of the seesaw. So if cortisol levels are high, testosterone is going to be low. Now, that doesn't mean like if you have elevated cortisol in the morning because you had 3 cups of coffee, it's morning because cortisol is supposed to be high and you did a really intense workout. Like all of that should raise cortisol levels. But if you're healthy, your cortisol levels drop within 30 minutes to 60 minutes following a weight training session, and testosterone levels start to climb back up again. So I just don't want to confuse people and think you always have to have low cortisol in order to have elevated testosterone. It doesn't work that way. But long term, if someone has chronically high cortisol levels, or even worse, their cortisol levels stay high for so long that they become cortisol resistant and their adrenals stop pumping out so much cortisol, and then they reach those stages of adrenal fatigue. Like any of that is going to lead to reduced testosterone. So the if someone has the goal of raising testosterone levels, again, what I usually steer guys and even women to is doing the things that help you to have a well-balanced cortisol rhythm and improve your resilience, stress resilience. And if you do that, you end up with more optimal testosterone levels. So the reason I think that's important is I'll have I'll work with guys and like their symptoms will be low libido, low motivation. They've gained body fat around the stomach, and one of their first questions a lot of times is, should I go on testosterone replacement therapy? And even if their testosterone is low, I still don't think that's the right first choice because they're not going to get anywhere near the benefit of the testosterone replacement therapy if they're not getting enough sleep, if they're not eating appropriately, if they're not exercising right, if they're not using certain supplements. And uh, I would actually encourage guys to leverage the power of peptides first, do everything they can that way, and then if their testosterone still isn't where it needs to be, they could look at testosterone replacement therapy. And in some men, like if they got hit between the legs when they were playing football, or they had some kind of an accident, or they had a concussion, like those are real reasons why a guy may not be able to raise testosterone without testosterone replacement therapy. But in most cases, most of the guys that I'll work with, they'll see a pretty significant improvement in symptoms and or their testosterone levels just by working on their stress hormones, improving resilience, and just getting healthier and leaner and fitter.
I saw a question come in, and this was a question of mine. So, how can we test our cortisol levels and know where we are? What are some ways that we could test it?
If you go to a conventional doctor, they're gonna probably, if they'll order it. I mean, not all doctors will, but they'll probably just order a morning cortisol test. And that doesn't tell you a lot because again, cortisol needs to be pulsed out in a rhythm. And so it should be highest in the morning, drops in the early afternoon, and then it really kind of plummets at night, ideally. So you can do a salivary 4-point cortisol test where you're just spitting into a tube 4 times during the day, and then you find out what your cortisol levels are. They usually test DHEA as well. for guys that are really wanting to take control of their health, I mean that is good to get that tested, but I would also complement that with uh, total and free testosterone and estrogen and full thyroid panel, um, and lipids and glucose and hemoglobin A1C. I think for anyone over the age of 40, they should be getting tested at least annually with a really comprehensive test because the important thing isn't always like what your numbers are. Even with that cortisol rhythm, it might not be just where it is today, but it's seeing the trend over time. So if you consistently get lab work done, you can kind of catch issues before they become problematic. You may see that even though your cortisol levels were normal last year and they're still normal this year, they're worse now than they were before, which may lead you to making better decisions about your health today.
Thank you for touching on that. I know they put me on DHEA and pregnenolone to balance out the cortisol levels so that
Hmm.
progesterone can work and so
Yep.
forth. So let's shift into stress more broadly. How does chronic stress show up in men's daily lives, particularly in focus, performance, and decision making?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying again that when cortisol levels are high, it redirects blood flow from the prefrontal cortex, which is your logic center, to your primal brain. And just that alone can make someone react really poorly. Now, that usually will show up when stress is acute, like there was an emergency or an interruption at work or some bad news all of a sudden. And then a guy will have a decision that he needs to make. Maybe it's at work and he makes a lousy decision because it's either overly emotional or it's just made without any logic because there's not much blood flow into that part of the brain. So from a performance at work standpoint, there's that. But also, like I usually like when I think of guys who have cortisol imbalances, I usually picture three different body types. One is just somebody that's obese, and because of the obesity and the weight gain, they're gonna have testosterone imbalances and cortisol imbalances and so on. Then there is the executive body type. So I had a lot of clients like this when I was working with people one-on-one early in my career. A generally skinny or thinner guy, arms and legs are actually on the scrawny side, but he's got this bowling ball kind of stomach. That to me is a sign of someone he's under a lot of stress. A lot of times he'd have bags under his eyes too, um, sometimes balding, but that the stress caused muscle loss in his arms and legs, which is usually the first place that it goes, and then the visceral fat in the stomach, which is the most unhealthy kind of fat that we can have. It's extremely inflammatory. It also stimulates estrogen secretion. So, um, and then the third type would be like what we think of as the dad bod, where it's a guy who's just getting really soft. And a lot of times that body type is more from excess estrogen than it is even too little testosterone. So if if we start with each of those individual body types, then the kind of the right method or plan, um, you can kind of individualize it based on the person. So for someone who's overweight and the stress caused him or her, but we're talking about guys here, so him to be overweight, getting on higher protein, maybe a reduced calorie, but usually just increasing protein, using something like tirzepatide, uh, and just moving more can get him headed in the right direction and start balancing out his hormones. So that as weight loss improves or his body composition improves, his hormones should balance out better. And I really am an advocate for more men using tirzepatide for that reason, because there are a lot of guys that are carrying too much weight and it's extremely unhealthy. Um, not not just in the way that they're able to perform in the short term, but the effect that it's going to have the longer that they're holding on to that. So in the case of being overweight, of course, he's going to be able to perform mentally and physically better by dropping the weight. But the guy who is the executive that's under a ton of stress, he's probably not eating because in his case, his higher levels of stress kind of shut off his appetite. He's busy. He's working hard, and but he's lost a lot of muscle. Something like sermorelin can be super helpful for helping him to get sleep, support lean body mass. And as he gets more physically strong, he's going to feel better and be more resilient. And then the dad bod, that could be a kind of a combination of tirzepatide and sermorelin, where just improving his body composition and getting rid of some of that body fat and visceral fat is going to help with estrogen and testosterone levels. So, from a performance, just a straight up performance standpoint, I think it's important to understand like what this guy has going on that's causing the reduced performance, even though the root cause could be a cortisol imbalance. It can show up a little bit differently from one guy to the next.
And what are your thoughts on testosterone and ipamorelin for visceral fat and balancing
I
out?
I think I mean tesamorelin, ipamorelin, those are outstanding. Love sermorelin as well. From experience working with clients, uh, for those that need better sleep and want to improve body composition, I'll steal them toward, or I'll send them toward sermorelin. For
Interesting.
those who aren't really dealing with sleep issues, like their sleep is pretty good, but their body composition is not where it needs to be, and they want to build muscle, shed body fat, then I'd go the ipamorelin, and the ipamorelin and tesamorelin. So there is a difference between the two. Of course, it's going to be a little individualized too. So somebody even in this chat might say, "Oh my gosh, started using ipamorelin and tesamorelin, and my sleep has been better than ever." Uh, and for others, it's the sermorelin, and I've seen just the better quality sleep with the sermorelin. So sleep-wise, that's what I go to. Body comp, it's the other two.
That's good to know. Thank you. That's really, really good advice. And it's interesting you say that because I've tried both. And the sleep quality I get on Sermorelin is so much better, but I see benefits and effects of tesamorelin
Hmm.
or with body composition. And recently I've been uh, testing out AOD MOTS, and I still like Tessa. I've been doing AOD MOTS Tessa, but I just love testosterone so, so much. I see and love the benefits. I had a question come in. I just want to make sure that I'm addressing these questions as we're talking on the topic. Would hit or sit exercises help with switching between sympathetic and parasympathetic as well? Similar to weight training, not to replace it just as one more workout.
It depends on the person. So I know that, like, according to research, high intensity interval training or HIIT training has a lot of benefits in that you can get a lot of work done in a short period of time. There's some metabolic advantages of it compared to like regular low intensity cardio. But it's kind of like cold therapy or sauna. It can be too intense for somebody who's dealing with cortisol dysregulation. So it's not something that I recommend specifically when we're talking about cortisol balance and optimizing health. If somebody's sleeping well and they're recovering well from exercise and they want to include that, it's definitely an efficient way to add some cardiovascular benefit to it and some metabolic benefit to your program. Uh, Not in place of resistance training, but in addition to it, would be my take on it.
Thank you for that. And Yanese wrote, so when a man has a high stress job and works graveyard, gets a little sleep, but works out every day and eats healthy, can a petite therapy help? Which one would be best?
Kind
Peptide
of what?
therapy. I think it's not meant to be petite therapy. It's peptide therapy
Oh,
help.
peptide. Oh, sure, sure, sure. Well, yes. I mean, peptides are definitely going to help no matter what you're dealing with. So, having the graveyard shift and using peptides is going to be better than just having the graveyard shift for sure. Uh, I know that it's very difficult, especially, I don't know if you have children, and with that question, that you all also have daytime activities where you're doing stuff with them and that throws the schedule off. But the consistency of the schedule, even with graveyard shifts for sleep, becomes more and more important. It it is it is difficult. Like that is probably the hardest thing to master to have optimal health with is when you're working overnights, but you can try and mitigate it as much as possible. So that again, that's where I would say Sermorelin would be a great one to include in your program. I mean, other ones like NAD, of course, could be helpful. Maybe methylated B12 as well. And it just takes a little bit of experimenting too. So one of the things that I always tell my clients is, we'll put a plan together here coming out of this initial session, and we're going to find out what works really well for you over the next 6 weeks and what does, and sometimes what doesn't work at all. And so you may try, some peptides and they don't do the trick, and other ones are amazing. And so being willing to just try them over a period of many, many months, I think would be important. But Sermorelin, I would definitely recommend as one of them. BPC 157 and TB 500, which I haven't mentioned yet, also are helpful in terms of calming the body's stress response, in addition to their effects on soft tissue and tissue regeneration, reducing inflammation, gut health, that kind of thing. So I will, like Sermorelin and BPC 157, TB 500 are some of the peptides that are usually my go-tos when we're talking about cortisol.
Well, thank you for that. I know there's a lot of papers and a lot of research between high stress, lack of sleep, and Alzheimer's and dementia. I'd like for
Mhm.
you to talk about stress and its long-term risks, like heart disease and metabolic issues.
Sure. So again, starting off with the brain, since we're talking about Alzheimer's, there's definitely a connection with sleep debt, long-term sleep debt, and Alzheimer's and other dementias. The research shows that you actually, long-term with high cortisol, people will experience a reduction in gray matter. So if you're actually losing brain matter from the effects of high cortisol long-term, it's an it's not surprising that it can lead to issues like dementia. But as I said earlier, in addition to the brain stuff, cortisol also raises blood pressure. So long-term elevated blood pressure is going to cause all sorts of problems from a cardiovascular disease risk standpoint. In addition, when cortisol levels are constantly elevated, it tends to also increase insulin. And over time, people become more insulin resistant. So when you combine high blood pressure and insulin resistance, and then because of the insulin resistance, the potential for higher blood sugar, now you're creating this perfect storm of cardiovascular disease risk. And it's why a lot of times, like those that the insulin resistance doesn't always show up as leading to weight gain. About 20% of people with type 2 diabetes are actually at a normal weight. So a guy could be insulin resistant, could definitely have high blood pressure and elevated blood glucose and developing cardiovascular disease or even end up with a heart attack, even though in street clothes he looks like he's just at a normal healthy weight. And people are like, oh my gosh, he he never showed a sign of being sick or having any kind of conditions and ends up with a heart attack. And that's not surprising when you understand the impact that cortisol has on cardiovascular risk and health.
That's
One other thing it can do is from a degenerative standpoint, again, because of its impact on muscle loss, you know, of all of the factors, blood markers and things that we can do to enhance longevity, muscle mass, the amount of muscle mass that you have is one of the key determining, if not the key determining factor in longevity and quality of life as you get older. So if people are dealing with chronically elevated cortisol and the loss of muscle, it's going to take years away from your life later on, or at least quality of life years away from your life later on, because at a certain point, you can't build back the muscle that you lost. You can only maintain what you have. Fortunately, again, uh, because we've got peptides, and I can't state this strong enough. Like I've been doing this for 24 years, And it's just been this past year where every client that I work with, at least every client who's in the United States, I have clients all over the world, but everyone who's in the United States, I can get them on peptides and I can give them an advantage that I've never been able to do before with diet, supplements, and exercise alone. So no matter what your age is and what you're dealing with, you can get an extra edge from the use of the peptides that we have available. Um, but that said, if it's just left to its own device, long-term cortisol is going to really rob from your future quality of life. So if you're a guy who's listening to this, who your wife or your significant other listened to it first and told you to listen to it, hoping you'd hear that message, you can't keep putting off getting healthy and fit. You've got to make a decision to do it now. And it's not just peptides, and it's not going to be just sleep or just eating better. It's all of that and getting some resistance training in that matters.
What a great reminder, Tom. What a great reminder for all of us. I mean, they do say the number one killer is stress. So
Hmm.
thank you for reminding all of us to just
Yep.
take a moment today, take a deep breath, focus on your health, just calm your nervous system. So thank you for that. Do you know if men are more susceptible to stress and chronic stress than women? Are there any research or data studies that you've read?
That's a great question. Actually, men are more, they can handle higher levels of stress longer than women on average. There's individuality here on average without showing negative effects on their health from it. But that's what part of the research shows. But from my experience, women are more likely to ask for help and pay attention to the signals their bodies are giving them earlier and do something about it than guys are. For too many guys, they don't ask for help until they have that heart attack or until their doctor at least says you're gonna have a heart attack, or I need to put you on a prescription because you've got type 2 diabetes or something significant. So it is true that guys can handle a little more in the way of stress, and a large part of that is because of their much higher levels of testosterone. But that said, everybody's got their breaking point, and if you pay attention to what your body's telling you before you get to that, hopefully you won't have something severely bad happen to you in the way of a heart attack or stroke or uh, even the development of cancer or whatever that poor choice in your lifestyle is leading you toward.
Mm, that's great information. So now moving from stress to fatigue, how can men tell the difference between the normal tiredness of a busy life and the kind of fatigue that points them to a bigger issue requiring some medical attention or intervention?
Good question. So so there is the I think again this a big part of it. One could be getting tested annually. So sometimes we'll fool ourselves into thinking that we're healthier than we are, and your blood doesn't lie. That's actually a Jim Lavelle quote. So to bring him back into the conversation, but your blood doesn't lie. So if you're getting lab testing done every year, then there's a good chance you'll see something showing up long before you may even be able to admit it to yourself. That said, there are times when something can happen unexpectedly, or there's a quick change in your level of fatigue. So, for example, uh, I think it was 2021 or 2022, I was outside doing some lawn work, walking up a hill behind our house, and I had to pause halfway up the hill because I couldn't catch my breath. Like I was just shocked and thinking, man, do I have a heart attack or what's going on here? So I stopped halfway up the hill and I texted our life insurance guy and I said, "Can you put another 500,000 on my life insurance?" Before I said anything to Vanessa, I'm like, "Oh, maybe if I'm dying, I'll just add some more to my life insurance and then move on." Turns out that it was COVID. Uh, and I realized that a couple of days later. Yeah, so it wasn't anything major. But the reason I bring that up is I all of a sudden had this major reduction in my energy, my capacity to do physical work. And that, I mean, yeah, no big deal. It was just COVID, and I was over that in a few days. But for a lot of guys, they are ignoring the fact that they can't move as well as they did before, or they're just saying, "Oh, it's just age," or I'm not eating well, or not exercising. And if if your cells aren't getting as much oxygen as they could because you've developed some cardiovascular issues, some atherosclerosis, like you don't want to ignore that. And that fatigue, that physical fatigue that you experience can be something serious. So it doesn't hurt to get checked out if you're feeling fatigued, unusually tired. Uh, if, on the other hand, you are going through a tough time at work, you're like I always think of our accountant who, for a good chunk of the year, he his social media posts are happy, and he's showing stuff with his family, and then it's like between middle of February to the end of April, he just kind of closes in on himself, and his demeanor changes, and he's under a high level of stress. Some of us, that's inevitable. And if we're extremely fatigued along with that, like, to me, the sign is not to say you need to get out of that stress. Like, he's not going to stop working as an accountant, but he needs to make some different choices during that season that he's under that level of stress to not have that fatigue be as bad as it is. Making sure that he is getting in 7 hours of sleep, using some adaptogens to help handle the stress. I definitely recommend, again, BPC 157, TB 500, or some sermorelin or ipamorelin or tesamorelin to help him with that stress resilience as well. But the if the fatigue comes on all of a sudden, I would normally go and check it out. If it's been a gradual thing and you can kind of connect it to diet, exercise, lifestyle, or work, well, then it's probably an issue of you needing to build some better resilience. And you can do that through diet, lifestyle, and exercise choices, and then the use of the peptides.
Mm, very good information. Very, very good. Thank you, Tom. All right, let's talk about how fatigue, let's just bring it all together now. How fatigue, cortisol, low testosterone, and even thyroid function, how are they all interconnected? Let's just tie them all together.
Sure. As cortisol levels go up, I mean, we talked about testosterone and how cortisol and testosterone are kind of each end of a seesaw. Actually, with thyroid function, that's the case as well. So high levels of cortisol can suppress thyroid function. Interestingly, when thyroid function goes down, cholesterol levels go up. So the guy who's tired ends up going into the doctor, and the doctor sees their cholesterol levels are up, and so he ends up on a statin, when in reality, the issue is the fact that he's under a high level of stress. And because of that, his thyroid isn't working like it's supposed to. And because of that, his cholesterol levels are elevated. Um, so thyroid, if it's suppressed, it's going to make you feel tired. I mean, that's just a fact. It also can lead to constipation. It can lead to hair and skin issues, cold hands and feet. I take Armour Thyroid myself. So I tried to do all of the natural stuff in order to support thyroid function, but that just didn't work. So I noticed once I got to the right dose, it made a significant difference in my mental acuity and focus and that kind of thing. But for a lot of people, they don't necessarily need to jump right into thyroid medication. They just need to get their cortisol levels balanced out. And then because of that, testosterone and thyroid will function a lot better. But yeah, thyroid's one of those that I it's almost like when people have low thyroid, it's like they're trying to push a thought through a straw. And that that sign of that thyroid issue, especially if it comes on, midlife, a lot of times it's more stress related than it is an actual thyroid problem. It can be autoimmune issues, it can be Hashimoto's, that kind of thing. But I'd say half of the time ish with clients, it's more of a stress and adrenal issue that's driving the suppressed thyroid function.
Mm. From someone who has had an incredible year of high stress, a lot of different things that have tied to, I mean, talking about divorce and a new company and all these different things. It's really difficult to say, reduce your stress, duh, right?
Right.
But I think it's just being conscious and aware. That's the first step.
Yeah.
But I'd love for you to talk about, if a man only made one change tomorrow to protect his long-term health, what would you tell him? What is advice that you could give someone to say, hey, I mean, it just seems like stress is that domino, that first domino that
Yeah.
cascades into a series of other things. So, what can we do? Where's that one place that where can we start? So, sleep. That was a good one. Get some
Yeah.
sleep.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, sleep would be the most important thing that he could do. And not just getting enough sleep, but there is some evidence that the earlier you're getting to bed before midnight, the better the quality of sleep you're going to get. And I don't think that it's not nothing magical about midnight. It's really how soon after it gets dark are you going to sleep. And so going to sleep at 9 o'clock might seem unrealistic, especially if people are up working late into the night. But if you were to get up at 9, I mean, sorry, go to bed at 9 and then get up at 4 or 5 and do your work in the morning, if you do that long enough, your cortisol levels are going to be peaking in the morning, which means your brain's going to be working a lot better in the morning than it would have at night. You're going to get better deep in REM sleeps. You're going to produce more growth hormone and more testosterone, growth hormone at night, testosterone in the morning. Um, so there's nothing that can make up for poor sleep in the way of our diet, exercise, and other lifestyle issues. You can mitigate it in the short term, but long term, sleep's absolutely the most important. Then it would be, making sure that you're moving during the day and getting enough protein, eating frequently, and augmenting all of that with the right supplements and peptides.
I
But the
love
one thing
those
is always
three.
sleep.
Those three right there. Like those are the things that you can control. You can't control what happens throughout the day, but go to
Yeah.
bed early, get your
Yeah.
sleep, get rest, eat your protein, and move throughout the day, even if it's just for a few minutes. Go for a walk.
Yeah. To me, strength training and some may hear me say this and they'll be like, oh, he's a personal trainer, that's why he's saying it. Resistance training is non-negotiable, period. And I will not miss workouts because I'm human like everybody who's watching this. And I know if I go for a couple of weeks without working out, I'm probably going to go for a couple of months before I work out or a couple of years. Like I will come up with the excuses once those excuses start rolling. So when I broke my neck 3 years ago, I think that happened on a Saturday. Had emergency surgery. I think we got out of the hospital on Monday or Tuesday, and I went back to the gym on Thursday. I had a friend, Vanessa drove me. I had a friend meet me there, and we just hooked up my limbs to whatever exercise that could work without putting strain on my neck because I was in a collar. And I didn't do that because I went there to sweat and build muscle or anything like that. I did it so that I didn't break the cycle of strength training. Resistance training, when you do it right, it secretes testosterone, helps in the secretion of testosterone. It helps with healing injured tissues. It helps with insulin sensitivity. It builds your capacity for storing carbohydrates. I mean, there is nothing in my mind in terms of movement that's more powerful than resistance training. And as I said, it even helps with building stress resilience because of the impact it has on parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So um, that's a close second to sleep. And even when you're under a lot of stress, finding a way to just move in the gym under resistance, even if it's a little bit less because you're under stress, that's still a close second to getting enough sleep.
Well, Tom, when you haven't been to the gym for a very, very long time, it can feel intimidating and
Uh-huh.
overwhelming. We talked about this on one of our personal calls. It
Yeah.
was just like I downloaded Fitbod, right? There's
Yeah.
so many apps and trainings and videos, free videos out there that people could tap into, and you don't necessarily need weights. You could use your body weights. I mean, where can people start? Let's say you've been out of shape for a while, you haven't been to a gym. Is there anything that you'd recommend to get that person to do some
Yeah.
strength training or resistance training?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of clients when I work with them that the first week after we meet, all they need to do is one set of body weight squats, which could be standing up and sitting down to a chair. one set of push-ups, and they can put their hands up against a wall or up on some stairs so that that makes the push-up movement easier. And then one set of rows, meaning they just bend over and they can pull up a milk jug or a dumbbell if they have a dumbbell, but they do one set of each of those 3 times a week. And they look at me on the screen and they're like, "Are you serious?" Yeah, because all you're doing is training the habit of showing up and doing a little bit of work without overtaxing your body, without feeling like you're going to be intimidated because there's people around you at a gym or something like that. You can do that in your own home. And week two, they move up to two sets of each of those 3 times a week, week three, 3 times a week. And after they've been doing that for a month and they feel the confidence from just having been able to check the box of, I did that for 4 weeks in a row. I followed that workout program, even though I didn't have to break a sweat or anything like that. That'll give you the confidence to take the next step. So it doesn't have to be a beat down, high intensity, sweat like crazy kind of workout. It just needs to be something that you consistently do to get yourself in the habit of it. And in a short period of time, it'll become something significant as long as you stick with it.
Can you just quickly talk about your services and if someone needs help and they need a place to start, where can they find you and some of the what you currently offer as far as the program goes?
Yeah, I mean, I do work with clients one-on-one through virtual sessions. I have some virtual training programs as well. For some clients, I'll do customized stuff, and for others, I've got ongoing programming. The best, and then a number of guides too, depending on some of the issues that people may be dealing with, whether they're genetic or um, thyroid or adrenal issues, that kind of thing. So the two places would be either on Instagram, I'm at Tom Nicola, or tomnicola.com. So just keep it simple, and those would be the two places to go.
Thank you, Brenda. She posted it. Be sure to follow him. He has great, fantastic content. And yeah, thank you so much, Tom. Any last final words for our community here today?
Yes, absolutely. I want to just give a shout out to my wife, Vanessa Romero. She has a Instagram, Hey Perimenopause, but she was actually the one who found LEMD. We had been talking about, and she actually did the search for it first, the ability to get started with peptides and then be able to have a company to partner with where we'd be able to recommend them to friends and family members and clients. And so I wouldn't be on this without her. She's amazing at what she does. She's got great content as well. And so thanks for getting me here, Vanessa, and hopefully it helped
Oh,
everyone as well. She's actually on screen and showing one of our two dogs, one of our Shih
oh.
Tzus. So thank you.
We appreciate both of you. Thank you so, so much for coming on and educating our community. And I hope you all enjoyed it tonight. This was just such a great reminder and wonderful information. Thank you for talking about cortisol, stress. I mean, it seems like it all starts there, and thank you to our beautiful Ellie community for tuning in and joining us tonight. Thank you all. This is all possible because of this beautiful community that we have. I'm so grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Tune in tomorrow for our weekly educational series. We love you all. Thank you again, Tom and Vanessa, for
Thank
being
you.
here. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening, everyone. Take care.
Bye.